how to correctly work out your return on investment or to identify the right returns for your commercial property. A lot of people don't know that because you're looking at gross returns versus net returns. You're measuring residential against your commercial. Now, commercial is very specific. There's a particular way of working out what's calculated in the net rent, the net yield versus the cap rates versus your return on investments. What's calculated? Should you be adding in stamp duty? Should you be adding management fees, land tax, all of those things that are supposedly part of the returns. So join me for this video as I'm going to share with you on the whiteboard how to calculate the returns from beginning to end of a property so you truly understand what is that return, especially when you're trying to measure your residential returns against your commercial, maybe potentially against other investments. You've got to understand what exactly makes the right returns for the right type of commercial property. So let's go. So I'm going to share with you a industrial property in Brisbane in an area called Crestmead. They're actually a newly built industrial warehouses. They have a tenant in there on about a 3-year lease. So the property was purchased for $1,050,000. So the property is under contract at the moment. The rent is about $62,000 net. So I'm going to take you through this on the whiteboard to share with you how we calculate the returns for the client and what are some of the things to take into consideration, some of the things we check, and how to define your ultimate returns. So the number one thing we got to understand in this particular property is that what we look at is the purchase price, so $1,050,000. So first, on one side, we're going to talk about the actual property and what are some of the loans and fees to do with the loans. On the other side, we're going to talk about the net rent. So you get to see both sides, right? So we know the net rent's about $62,000 net, right? So what does that mean? That means tenant pays management fees, land tax on a single holding basis. So you have the holder singly not added to your other pile of properties in your entity. So it has to be a property that you have as a holding by itself in that particular entity, right? Land tax, rates, that's your council rates, water rates, strata fees. So obviously this is a strata property, right? And I'm going to share with you a little bit about what that property looks like afterwards. But it's strata fees, rates, management fees, land tax. So those 4 key components that your tenants pay for, right? So that's a net rent of $62,000. Then on top of that, your tenant pays for all of that. And that could add easily $15,000 to $20,000 to what your tenant pays for. So ultimately, your tenant's paying something like $82,000 and you're pocketing $62,000 into your pockets. Let's work out how that return goes, right? There's some things that are your obligations, certain things that are tenant's obligations, right? So I would put you pay for maintenance. So let's say that there's something happens with the roof, something happens with the air conditioning. Now the air conditioning is going to be, the tenant's going to service, but if something happens to the aircon, as in the thing it actually breaks, that's your issue. But remember, this is a newly built warehouse. I'm going to show you some photos of it. And that means that you won't be able to, like, it means that there's not that much maintenance, right? So I'm just going to put capital works, right? Capital works is like if you need to replace the roof, etc. Right? So those are the things that you pay for versus what the tenant pays for. So let's come over here and work out what the return is. Because it's net return, everything commercial is done on net return versus gross returns in residential. In the residential, your tenant will pay you $62,000 and all of that stuff has got to come out from the actual $62,000, whereas in commercial, it's on top, right? So how we work this out is we take the $62,000 and we divide it by 1,050,000 to get the returns, right? So that's a 5.9% yield. So we know you're getting a 5.9% yield for this industrial warehouse. Now I'm going to show you some photos again later on, but this shows you this is the return, right? Now let's look at how that applies to you when it comes to mortgages. So let's look at what the mortgage looks like, right? Let's say that you're borrowing 80% for this section. Let's say you're borrowing 70% for this exercise. Now you can go 65% based on the lease of the property, or you could be going higher or lower depending on where your situation is and how you service. So when we look at this, we'll look at it as a 70% LVR, right? What does that mean? That means 30% is a deposit So that's $1,050,000, and that's 315K. So it's a 315K plus 5% costs. That's your stamp duty, your legals, not including buyer's agency fees, but stamp duty, legals, etc., etc. Right? So that's like your valuation fees, your mortgage, your valuation fees, your loan fees. So that's 52,500, right, as your costs, right? And that's you totally in, right? That's how much you need to come up with, right? So that's typically for you is 367,500. So I put 367,500 on the side so that you know what the total is. Now you're borrowing 70% is commercial loan. 70% of 1,050,000 is 735,000. Right? So that's what you're borrowing, right? So let's have a look at that amount, right? So that amount is, we need to add for that sake, that, let's say that is at 6.75%. At the moment, the variable rate is 6.75%. At the actual rate of with fixed rates, about 6.3, 6.5. So depending on whether you want fixed rate or variable rate, right? So if we times that by 6.75, we end up with 49,612.50 cents, right? So that's how much it costs for you to support the property. Now we know you're getting 62,000. We know that the mortgage is 49,612, and most people ask, do we actually put it on interest or principal and interest? In commercial, it's always interest. Then you refinance. Preferably, you never have to pay off the principal. You just keep refinancing, pulling the money out, buying the next one, using the money for your lifestyle, and living on the positive cash flow. If you really like the property, it becomes blue chip. At some point, you might pay it off. But overall, what you want to do is you actually want to utilize the capital growth of that property to buy again rather than pay down the debt, right? So we know that now you are positive $12,387.50. Now, that $12,387.50 is what actually goes into your pockets after the mortgage has come out. After all outgoings, that's what goes in, right? Now, if you look at that as a return on investment on the 367,500 you put in, that is a 3.3%, 3.37%. So let's relate it up to there. That's a 3.37% cash on cash return, right? We call it a cash on cash return. So 3.37% cash on cash return is purely the cash return on the property. Now, we haven't added growth in. If we're looking at growth in terms of commercial property in a metro area, you will get anywhere from 5 to 7% per year and often more, right? So if we look at the cash component of this, well, we know it's 3.37%. If we add in just a 5% growth, which is just very, very conservative in the commercial property space, in remember in the last 3 years, we've probably gone up by 40%, right? We're looking at 8.7% as a return on investment. If it was a 7%, then you're over 10% in terms of return on investment on your property. But guess what? This property breaks even, gives you positive cash flow or return on the cash, plus there is growth on the back end. And that's why most people like to invest in commercial property, is because of this type of equation. Now, one of the things that most people get wrong is that sometimes they add in stamp duty and buyer's agency fees, right? And they said, oh, the yield is really terrible because it's got those. But that's where they're wrong. Buyer's agency fees and stamp duty do not form part of the yield. And the reason for that is these costs is of capital gains. Now, what does that mean? What does that actually mean? It means that when you are actually selling the property, let's say that you've bought the property, you've kept it for 3 years, now the property's worth 1.2, 1.3 million. Now, you probably made 150 to 200K in terms of capital growth. Now, you're going to need to pay capital gains tax on it. So what happens is before your capital gains tax and any discount is applied, all of the base costs, so these are called base costs, are taken out, right? So you don't take them out of the yield or the return when you buy it. They come out of the base cost. Now, the base cost means that, if you made, say, 200K and you've paid stamp duty of 52,500, which would talk all of your costs, right? Plus you're saying you pay the buyer's agency 20K, and it'll say that there's $72,000 that comes off it. So you made 200K, if $72,000 comes off it, you get $130,000 in hand, you get a 50% capital gains discount, and so therefore it's really $65,000 you need to put on your tax return or distribute it through your family trust, which means you ultimately end up paying very little tax or no tax at all on the actual capital gains on the property. And that's why most people think stamp duty or buyer's agency fees should come off the yield, but it's not coming off the yield. It needs to come off the base cost in the future when you actually sell the property. And that's what makes the huge amount of difference to the actual property, right? So that is also why there's such a big difference in the way that people look at commercial property, right? Because often it's calculated. Most people think it's calculated with all of the returns. So all of the returns that's there is basically the returns that you need to calculate. So all of the costs, all of the SPI vacancy, all of the stamp duty, and all of a sudden you have something that was a 5.9% return become a 4% return. So then, of course, the property doesn't stack up. But if you actually isolate your cost and you go, these are the costs that I'm paying for the mortgage, and this is what I get back from the actual commercial loan mortgage, from the actual net rent, and the money that's left over that's called passive income is actually passive income that's a return on the investment that I put in the actual deposit. If you treat it like that, then that's a correct way of looking at it. Then you look at the property itself, $62,000 being the net rent and the tenant paying all of the outgoings. So you boil down to the net rent. Then, of course, you have the base cost, right, which is your buyer's agency, your stamp duty, and anything else you can't write off. That comes off your capital gains. So there's lots of different costs to work out your return on investment. But ultimately, it's about the yield, and it is about how much money you put in your pockets, right? And how you structure the loan, whether you're doing 100% finance, whether you're taking the deposit out of another commercial property or another residential property, or whether this is pure cash, right? And that's where the strategy happens. And, join me for the following video where I'm going to tell you about 2 different types of properties and which one you should be choosing depending on your situation. Because that's really fundamental for the moment right now. Right? Right now in this market where the interest rate is high, you might be leveraging all the other properties and you're not sure which one to choose, right? So join me for the next video as I talk about that. But in this video, hopefully this is showing you how to actually work out the different returns of what exactly is a base cost, what exactly is a return into net rent, and then how you work out your mortgage and what you get back, right? So if this is all of interest to you and you want to find out more and you want to find out pinpoint the right type of property, which I'm about to share with you, make sure you join our Facebook group, which is absolutely free but has heaps of information on commercial property. But really the main thing about it is that you get the latest information on commercial property and you're with like-minded people. So I just want to share with you the property itself. So this property is in Crestmead. Crestmead is a newly developed area, so there's still some land to develop around there. But one of the main things here is I want to share with you sort of the area. You can see lots and lots of warehouses. And Crestmead is between Brisbane and Gold Coast. So that area is actually fairly well developed. And this is probably the last parcel of land before you hit like that Gold Coast run, right? So it is all of these little warehouses here. And you can see there's large format warehouses, small, and there's a lot of construction still going on with little warehouses, right? Because they're obviously really in demand. So we're looking at the Crestmead Business Park, and they're all pretty much built the same. You've got some car spaces, you've got your office space, and then you've got industrial there as well. It's a really, really good blend. So it looks like this. You've got a little mezzanine area with the floor, obviously fully approved. You've got the roller door, and you've got the storage area. Obviously, if your tenant comes in, then they'll be doing racking, pallets. There's bathrooms there. They might even put out another area where they're doing manufacturing or they're doing any kind of works, or they might be extending that mezzanine floor because obviously of the height. This is the office space. It's a small space. It's not huge, but obviously it's got a separate air conditioning and you can overlook the space. It's obviously done for a lot of it is business to business customers, but business to consumers and also drop in, especially the ones at the front works for business to consumers. So they can come in, pick up their stock as well. So There's parking aplenty along here, but plus on top of that, you do get, your visitor parking. So it's really, really straightforward property. And it has a good tenant in there. It's there for 3 years. And when you look at it, all of the units look some of them look a little bit different, whether they have more office versus industrial section of it. But ultimately, it's a format that works currently for the current market. So your tenant can install like little kitchenettes in there as well, but most kind of might be a room up the top, right? So again, property like this, why is it popular currently in the market? It's popular at the moment in the market because everyone's searching for industrial. So to try to get a 6% or close to 6%, it's a real push, especially that Brisbane area. When we're looking at Melbourne, it's about 4 to 4.5%. In Sydney, we're at 3 to 4%. So industrial is really at the peak, right? If you're regional, you can probably get it towards the 7th. But of course, it's all about that return on investment, how much growth versus how much cash flow you get. So you give a little bit of growth for more cash flow, or you give a little bit more cash flow and a little bit less growth, right? So it's all about finding that balance. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. The numbers make sense. If they don't, do drop me a line. If you want any additional information regarding this video or any other video, and make sure you do comment, subscribe, hit the bell. See you in the next video.